You recall that iconic scene where Ed eats his mattress whole, and you know how right afterwards there's that funny continuity error where the bed is immediately back? Now you might just think that it's a funny little background element thing, something that they overlooked or couldn't control, but the real reason is actually an entirely scrapped plotline regarding Ed eating his mattress. You see, after Bear No Beef Dip told him to, Ed would begin attempting it. However, it would struggle to go down halfway through. This was then when he would surprisingly get assistance from Brother. Brother is a dark gray ghost who you may have seen wandering around in old home videos or other cartoons like Sailor Moon, and even on his own channel. Brother would help demonstrate to Ed how to eat his whole mattress and swallow the entire thing, and this originally was going to lead to the whole plotline before continuing on to the next episode, where the rest of it could take place. However, they ultimately scrapped this whole idea, and what's left is just a slight oversight remnant. I managed to get an old tape of this scrapped episode. It was near completed, and I was able to sneak into Carney Drug Studios and obtain one, which I won't disclose how for privacy and safety reasons. Anyway, once it got to the point where Brother suddenly appeared, who by the way just kind of glitched in like an odd VHS static tape, he began demonstrating Ed to himself how to eat the whole mattress, stretching in the whole entire cartoonish way, as you'd expect. Honestly, there wasn't much weird things going on, but whenever Brother appeared, the screen quality would get all staticky and grainy, and things would just distort, and the audio would become muffled, and everything just generally would be a bit odd and off. Eventually, we got to the point where Double D was meant to come in, and now this is where other things start to get a bit weird, and it might be partially my fault, because you see, originally, the whole entire episode was Brother just tutoring Ed. However, some strange anomalous effects seem to happen that extended and prolonged the whole entire episode before Double D interrupts at the end. Because when I was trying to transfer the files for reviewing on my computer, just about nothing would work. Eventually I got desperate enough to try any format, even video games. I put it into an old Nintendo cartridge, and weirdly, when I put in the Nintendo cartridge, the nostalgia card came on and bled at me. He began ranting about the whole entire episode and how shit it is. I thought maybe this was somehow because I had my PC connected to the device with a capture card and my internet tabs were still open, and there was maybe some sort of Doug Walker thing on there. But weirdly enough, he began to appear inside Ed's room. He glitched in like Brother did before, but not everything was staticky, and he was in there with Ed and Brother and Double D, and things began interacting with each other in a way that otherwise is no way could be real or pre-made otherwise, and he began ranting and yelling at them, and he started shouting and bleeding out. What made things even stranger is that Mr. Enter showed up into the bedroom too, and he also began ranting about the episode in really, really weird ways, and saying how it's the worst thing ever because he could see Brother's ectoplasm spit on the mattress, and Brother just gave him a stare, a cold stare, squinting as he said this. And he also complained about Eddy being mean-spirited, and they began trash-talking the whole entire show and its writers and everything. Mr. Enter especially was going mad at this. Well, Double D began to talk back to them and scold them for their bad attitudes and bullying behavior and talk down to how bad that is, and they both began to fight back with them, and the point where Eddy was finally discovered came out, and he came out and started shouting back at them too and defending Edward, and it began this whole entire brutal, verbal match, and I could see Brother still standing there in the background, just ominously staring quietly, not at all moving. And it eventually got to the point where Double D just had about enough, and he slapped Nostalgia Crick's hand with the ruler, and he was like, "Ah!" And it was then decided that they would settle this all in a wrestling match, as while Mr. Enter and Nostalgia Crick were shouting at each other and not really getting along and just both having to coincidentally be up there, they seemed to figure that the best way to deal with the Ed boys and Brother would be to collab on this. Now, the two may not seem to get along much and have really weird conflicting views, but it's both with their shit takes that Mr. Enter and Nostalgia Crick can make quite the unlikely yet deadly alliance, creating all of these stupid and weird takes and these odd views full of deception. Truly, they would bring upon the Armageddon of any insightful and sensible cartoon reviewing. Anyways, it got to the point where the episodes started to become like the wrestling one, and a whole entire ring was set up, and the Eds were getting ready and awaiting for Nostalgia Crick and Mr. Enter's arrival, because, you see, the best way to sell this was through a wrestling match. Yes. Those two came into this show and started acting so rude and distasteful and impolite. Well, I'll tell you what. The Eds were gonna repay these fuckers by giving them the worst day of their lives. Those fuckers think they can step into the masked mumblers ring and start making a mess? Nah! Hell nah! They were ready to break some fucking necks. Eddy, Ed, and Double D were in their usual wrestling attires like in that episode, and Brother was also there, standing in the corner with Bear No Beef Dip on commentary, and the other kids were watching in the audience, with Rolf milking Beatrice and offering her to Jimmy and dancing to the shiny music. Eventually, the two whiny bitches came into the ring together. They were walking together, but they weren't standing together necessarily, keeping a distance as they separately entered into the ring. The match started, and Eddy began going like, "Yee-haw!" to combat them, and things were going as usual, as you expect. The Eds managed to get in some solid wrestling moves and a good display. They had much better cooperation skills than the two quote-unquote reviewers, and they did all sorts of suplex and DDTs and body slams and stunners to them and pile drivers. Brother Urge just mostly watched as if he wasn't there. In fact, sometimes he was just a shadow. Most of the times he was an odd glitch effect. Still weirdly felt like he was responsible for this. Sometimes, however, it would appear that Double D would interact with him, and he would kind of glitch out, almost as if his eyes were moving and bleeding, hyper-realistically. Eventually, unfortunately, Mr. Enter had about enough, and he began going this big mass hysteria rant, and his voice getting more and more whiny and milk-toasty white bitch. But it was then that Edward was able to distract him and point, saying, "Oh my god! They hit the Pentagon, Mr. Enter!" And then Mr. Enter was like, "What?" And he ran off the ring squirming, looking for who did this, who finally hit the peak of writing for him. It was one down, one left after he had trampled away. Mr. Nostalgia Crick was now all alone, but he did not seem to mind. 3 against 1! Note how he said 3, almost as if he couldn't see Brother there, who is now donning his Brother mask outfit from Sailor Moon. And he began screeching, and Mr. Nostalgia Craig's face began to distort, and his eyes became incredibly dark spots, and he started roaring, his voice deepening, and the screen shaking as it echoed, and the kids covering their ears, and he began pouring hyper-realistic blood off his face holes, and he became the spooky critic, and he seemed unstoppable. The Eds tried to defeat him, but he kept on overpowering their attacks, and Eddy was screeching like a madman again, and Double D making his weird noises like and Ed seemed to start panicking and wondering what to do, but then Brother and his snout stared at Ed, the two acknowledging each other once again. I guess Eddy isn't good enough for Brother to see him get his attention, but you could see a funny close-up first-person view of Brother and his snout facing forward and staring at Ed, and he began to extend and contort his snout to the music and nod his head a bit and drool a bit and go, And it was then where he could hear Baron Beefdip's voice echo throughout Ed's head. "Eat your mattress." Ed then shot up like, "Ho ho," and he looked at the critic, and then Ed dove on the nostalgia critic and began to eat him, swallowing him whole, and you could hear Doug going like, as this happened, and then Ed successfully forwarded the nostalgia critic hole. What a champ. The Eds began to celebrate as Berno Beefdip rang the bell, signifying the end of the match, and the kids in the crowd watching, cheering on for them. Brother was still standing on the apron. However, as the screen faded away, so did he too, in the same type of glitchy static. And then it cut back to Ed's room, and the episode began right there, ending it, going on to the next program. I do not know what happened here, but I know that, for one thing, I saw a cursed object that must never be